What's up? Welcome to the State of Our Workforce. Where are we now? The Black History Month edition. You can find us here each month on LinkedIn Live, where we take a deep dive into diverse, innovative, and effective workforce solutions that we're adopting at the National Fund to address local challenges across the country through our diverse and very talented collaborative network. With us today is Earl Buford, president of CAEL and a member of the National Fund's board of directors, and someone that I consider a mentor in the workforce development space. So super excited to have you here today, sir. How are you? What's good?
So first of all, so good to be with you, Dr. Wilson. Anytime I get time with you is a good day. And the fact that we're having this conversation this month obviously is poetic, but we're going to get into some in our short time together, some serious situations that we have to really think about and look to improve.
Facts. Okay, so let's get into it. So I dubbed this the Black History Month edition, and I want to frame our conversation by sharing some takeaways from articles that I've been reading, one in particular on the state of Black workforce in America. I don't think it comes as a surprise to you or me, but I'd love to get your reaction. And then if you could talk a little bit about how you're moving in space, what you're doing, how you're leading CAEL and operating in space to chip away at these things, these challenges, that would be great. So does that work for you? Yes?
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
perfect. Okay. So an article that I've been reading looks at the history of the Black-white unemployment equity issue over the last 60 years. And what it highlights is that there's been no real change, right? Regardless of economic conditions, Black job seekers are still less likely to find work than their white counterparts, right? And so this data really looks at unemployment from 1963 to 2022. And notes that the Black unemployment rate has been 2.1 times as high as whites on average. So there's been some ebb and flow, obviously, over the years, but writ large, not much sustained progress. And obviously, you and I could spend a ton of time digging into the drivers of these kinds of things. But the one that I want to lift up is one around anti-Black discrimination in hiring process and the hiring process, and how it plays a major role in perpetuating this. And so would love to get your thoughts and just like dig into that. So I'll ping it over to
Yeah.
you.
So the fact that the research is from 63 to 2022, 1963, and I think that's a long time for this work. I think back to my own career in workforce after short time in education started in 1995. So nearly 30 years into the work I've led or been a part of, and we're still having this conversation. I don't say that as a complaint, just like, okay, well, whatever we've done hasn't really worked. And we'll get into some things that we can talk about that could potentially help. But I'd also think about as unemployment is one piece you brought up, but also the labor market participation rate, and which is really rarely talked about in the field. And right now the average is anywhere from 63 to 64% of a person involved in the economy. Well, for African Americans, this drops to 40% participation, and for African American men, it's high 30s, almost 40%. So that's another tremendous drop in participation. And you talked about anti-Black hiring. There's some outright scenarios we researched and talked about, and there's also the subtle. And I love my HR friends out there, but they are confronted with this on a daily basis, sometimes through their own internal hiring biases, and then there's the industry-wide biases that we can also spend this entire time on. We know it's there. So what are some things to do? I mean, there's so many hardworking folks in the field, but I want to talk about a couple of things that CAEL, and CAEL stands for Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, but that's too long to say, so we say CAEL. We're a membership organization, 4,000 members. We are really kind of a systems alignment consulting group, if you want to really hone in on it. And we'll come back to what alignment is needed to combat some of this.
Mm-hmm.
So years ago, we created this thing we call 10 Principles, which is really a data-derived learning benchmark for adult learners has been our focus, with a focus on underserved populations, and Black and brown, everything else that everyone else out there works on.
Mm-hmm.
We just revamped those 10 principles into a framework called the Allies Framework, which focuses on 5 primary themes: affordability for adult learners and workers, obviously career connections and relevance. How does degrees and credentials fit into, and how you deal with bias in hiring and the articulations between that. Academic empowerment. I mean, let's be honest, true middle class empowerment is getting degrees and moving forward. Student support, what's really needed. I'll come back to some practice on that. And I'm going to say this last just for this page, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's really the centerpiece of our work. Our work is built about adult learners of color, adult learners of genders, things of that nature. So really hone in on that. So these 5 themes we're focusing on each category, but also the research and the evaluation to support that, or find holes in the support mechanisms that are needed. Embedded in that is a practice called credit for prior learning, used to be known as prior learning assessment. The reason I'm bringing this up because in this unemployment piece, do you need college? Your credentials are more important, stackable. I don't like the debate because yes to all of it.
Right.
We need all of it to combat this. You may need a credential to get that first job, but you need another credential to get that second job. You need a degree to get the $100,000 job.
Right.
We keep going. So I don't like that debate because I want all of it. But one thing I do want to mention as a tactic in some of this is this whole credit for prior learning piece. And not just because that's our work, but I think it's an underutilized tool. It can be used in higher education, it can be used in workforce practicing. So with credit for prior learning as an inclusive process, we found that in higher education, degree obtainment, 22% more students who are able to work at the university that uses credit for prior learning, which is the process for your work experience becoming credits. 22% will complete. Also, because you're focused, you're going to save anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 in your college career. The other last thing I want to say on the average, because the fight that most academia says, well, it's gonna is we're gonna lose money in this process. Well, the research has said 18% or higher will complete other college credits because they're focused on what they want. They're more likely to get minors. They're more likely to complete, get minors, continue their growth, go for other degrees. So I just wanted to mention that because only 10% of the universities in this country utilize it. So think about all this good research, and we know folks need degrees because even job, otherwise we wouldn't have this debate. So I just want to use this as another a tool in then closing the equity gap because it's hard to. We don't have to have this debate anymore. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I mean, shout out to prior credits. I mean, that was also, that really got a big push back during the Obama administration through the TACT initiative. That was a key part of it. So I like the multi-pronged approach that you're talking about. And so that really pivots me to things that we're doing at the National Fund, and what we're talking about. Last week, we had the benefit of being in conversation with Claire Minson, discussing an article that she wrote for LinkedIn, and I think Josh can probably pull that up, about the 10 things our field must do if we want to field as in workforce development, if we want to realize a racially equitable and just society. And so it talks about working at racism, working at all 4 levels of racism. So it's all the time, right? So it's the personal level, the interpersonal level, the institutional level, and the structural level, right? And so that is something that we've been talking about at the National Fund. And I see we could spend a ton of time on this, but that resonates with me when I listen to what you're saying and how you guys are thinking about the work at CAEL. Another piece that she talks about, we could dig into this, a whole other space, right, is around the narrative change piece. But I want to ping to what we're doing at the National Fund and how we're moving this conversation along. And so one of the things that we really are leaning into is level setting on the state of workforce equity in Black America. And that's really looking at occupational segregation. We have some work that we're starting to lift up around that, and also disparities in unemployment, wealth, and more. And I just want to say, this is where data is really critical. And one of the things that we're doing at the National Fund is making that data available to our network. We have a workforce equity dashboard that identifies 9 indicators that we think are critical to workforce equity. And so our sites, our communities have access to this level of data. And we've done custom indicators, custom data for some of our sites that aren't really included in larger data sets. So that's one of the ways that we're working on it. But so, as I said, we could get into this on and on and on.
Well, please know this, Dr. Wilson, that the National Fund's dashboard is framing our work and supporting our work. And so I just wanted to make sure that folks know that. And the reason I'm on the board is one, I love the National Fund, but two, I want to be closer to this work so that we can utilize these tools in the field that the work that we're doing.
Right. Fantastic. So as we shift to wrapping up our time here, I'd love to just ping to you and get your thoughts on 3 things that we should or should not be focused on as we move forward with regard to workforce equity.
Since we have limited time, I think this whole alignment of, and folks are doing it, but if we want scale, we have to have, and equity in the middle of that scale, we have to align employers in industry with higher education, with workforce practitioners. We cannot just think of one path or one job anymore. It's really I like to say a path to pathway model with equity as a center, as a centerpiece of that work. Because if one is doing it well, if industry is doing well, that's still not connected well to the credentialing piece. If workforce practitioners are really fighting, but they have nowhere to train their trained folks can go, it's not going to work. We have to have them take a triangle, if you want to call it that, but it has to be aligned ecosystem approach with equity as the centerpiece of that.
Facts.
And that's where HR, other things get into play.
Okay. All right. So I'm getting the ping that we need to move on. So once again, I want to thank you, my brother. And to those of you out there in LinkedIn land, and in the words of Jay-Z, you could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with me. And I appreciate that. Be easy, everybody.